Fisherman's Wharf used to be the first thing people put on their San Francisco itinerary. For decades, it was the city's anchor tourist destination. The sea lions, the sourdough, the crab carts, the views. Somewhere between then and now, something went wrong. Here's the full story of why nobody wants to visit Fisherman's Wharf anymore. The Golden Era. What Fisherman's Wharf actually was. Before getting into what went wrong, it's worth understanding what Fisherman's Wharf was at its best, because the contrast with what it became is the whole point. The wharf's identity as a tourist destination grew out of something real. Italian immigrant fishermen, primarily from Sicily and Genoa, had been working the waters around San Francisco since the mid-19th century, settling in the North Beach and Fisherman's Wharf area and building a community around the bay's resources. By the early 20th century, Fisherman's Wharf was a functioning working waterfront where fishing boats actually docked, where Dungeness crab and Pacific seafood were processed and sold fresh on the same day they were caught, and where the restaurants that grew up around the industry were serving food that had a genuine and direct relationship to the harbor in front of them. The clam chowder and sourdough bread bowls wasn't a marketing invention. It emerged from the actual food culture of a fishing community. The wharf developed a tourist layer on top of this authentic commercial base through the mid-20th century, and for a long time, the two coexisted productively. The seafood was fresh because the fishing boats were still working. The restaurants had history because the families who ran them had been there for 2 or 3 generations and knew every supplier by name. Skoma's restaurant, which opened in 1965 in a former bait shack at the end of the pier, embodied this quality. Simple, direct, no-nonsense seafood in a setting that hadn't bothered to dress up because it didn't need to. Ghirardelli Square, which opened as a retail and restaurant complex in 1964 in the former Ghirardelli Chocolate Factory, a genuine industrial building with genuine history going back to 1893, and the Cannery, which opened in 1967 in the former Del Monte fruit and vegetable canning facility, were thoughtful adaptive reuse projects that gave the neighborhood additional cultural texture without inventing history that wasn't there. At its peak, Fisherman's Wharf was drawing 12 to 14 million visitors annually. The sea lions that colonized Pier 39 spontaneously beginning in January 1990, arriving in the weeks following the Loma Prieta earthquake of October 1989, which had temporarily cleared the marina of pleasure boats and left the dock space open, added an attraction that was entirely unplanned, entirely wild, and gave the area an unpredictable and genuinely entertaining quality that no amount of retail planning could have produced. This was a real place with real history, and the tourist industry that grew around it was, for a long time, more attached to that reality than most waterfront tourist districts in comparable American cities. When the fishing industry left, the single most consequential change to Fisherman's Wharf was the one that tourists rarely think about. The actual fishing boats stopped coming. The decline of commercial fishing in San Francisco Bay was a decades-long process driven by multiple converging factors: overfishing of Pacific fish populations, regulatory changes that increased operating costs for small independent operations, the economic pressure of competing against industrial-scale processors, and the broader collapse of several key species all contributed. The Dungeness crab fishery, the most symbolically central product of the wharf's identity, has been increasingly disrupted in recent years by climate-related changes to Pacific Ocean temperature that affect crab molting cycles and, critically, by the growing problem of harmful algal blooms in California coastal waters. Domoic acid contamination from these blooms forced extended closures of the Dungeness crab season in 2015 to 2016, again in 2019 to 2020, and in subsequent seasons, causing serious financial damage to the commercial crabbers who depended on those seasons. Some crabbers in the San Francisco Bay Area have been losing part of every recent season to domoic acid delays. By the late 20th century, the fishing boats that once defined the docks at Fisherman's Wharf had largely departed. The seafood being sold at the wharf was no longer primarily caught by vessels based at those docks, and in some cases other countries, presented within a marketing framework that implied a local origin it no longer fully had. This created the foundational inauthenticity that everything else built on. When the working waterfront left, the neighborhood became a theatrical version of itself, maintaining the visual language of a fishing district without the economic and human reality that made that language meaningful. The crab pots and nautical decor became props rather than tools. The fresh from the bay language became marketing copy rather than a description. Visitors paying $25 to $35 for a bowl of clam chowder in a restaurant that advertises its connection to the local fishing tradition are frequently eating crab that was shipped in from Dungeness fisheries in Oregon or Washington, prepared by a kitchen that hasn't interacted with a local fishing boat in years. That specific gap between what the place presents itself as and what it actually is the core problem from which every other complaint about Fisherman's Wharf flows. The price problem. San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in the United States to operate a business in, and Fisherman's Wharf exists within that cost structure while serving a tourist market that increasingly has better alternatives within the same city. A bowl of clam chowder in a sourdough bread bowl, the emblematic Fisherman's Wharf meal, the thing that represents the destination in food, terms the way the Golden Gate Bridge represents it visually, costs $18 to $25 at most establishments along the waterfront. A full Dungeness crab from a sidewalk steam cart runs $35 to $55, depending on size and what's available. A sit-down dinner at one of the mid-tier restaurants on the pier runs $65 to $100 per person before drinks. These prices exist because San Francisco's operating cost structure, among the highest commercial rents in the country, one of the highest minimum wages, significant regulatory compliance costs, makes them necessary for a business to operate profitably at that location. This is not gouging, it is arithmetic. The problem is not that San Francisco is expensive. Every visitor to San Francisco understands they are in an expensive city. The problem is that the same money, or comparable money, buys a significantly better experience in other parts of the city. Hayes Valley restaurants are operating at the same price tier as Fisherman's Wharf and offering cooking that is actually connected to San Francisco's contemporary food culture. The Mission District has some of the best burritos in the country at 1/3 the price of a Wharf bowl of chowder. The Ferry Building Marketplace opened as a revitalized food hall in 2003 along the Embarcadero, anchors one of the most interesting collections of food producers and vendors in the city, with genuine local sourcing, a Tuesday/Thursday/Saturday farmers market of real quality, and restaurants that compete nationally for food recognition. The Ferry Building represents exactly the alternative path that Fisherman's Wharf did not take. Both are waterfront locations. Both are accessible from the same general tourist corridor. One has a farmer's market with actual local farmers, a bakery whose bread is taken seriously, and fish that comes from boats the restaurants actually know. The other has a Bubba Gump. The visitor who figures this out on their first trip does not make the same mistake on their second. As San Francisco food writer Jonathan Kaufman observed, "The question isn't whether Fisherman's Wharf is expensive. Everything in San Francisco is expensive. The question is whether you're getting something that justifies the expense." And for food-savvy visitors, the answer has been increasingly no. The homogenization problem. Walk along the waterfront at Fisherman's Wharf today, and the experience is dominated by a specific kind of retail uniformity that people who knew the area in the 1970s and 1980s find genuinely disorienting. The gift shops have multiplied and converged on nearly identical inventory. San Francisco cable car magnets, Alcatraz hoodies, Golden Gate Bridge snow globes, and chain restaurants that could be in any tourist district in any mid-sized American city. The Bubba Gump Shrimp Company is there. The Hard Rock Cafe is there. A rainforest cafe operated on the pier for years. These restaurants exist at tourist destinations across the country, not because they have anything to do with the local culture, but because they have established brand recognition and reliable throughput. exactly the qualities that matter for businesses paying tourist district rents, and exactly the opposite of what made Fisherman's Wharf worth visiting in the first place. The Boudin Bakery Cafe deserves better company than it currently keeps. Boudin, which began on the waterfront in 1849 when founder Isidore Boudin combined the local sourdough starter with traditional French baking techniques, is a genuine San Francisco institution with a starter culture that has reportedly been maintained continuously for over 170 years. The flagship on Jefferson Street includes a museum, a demonstration bakery visible through a window from the street, and a cafe that serves the actual product. It is one of the few establishments on the wharf that can honestly claim continuity with the neighborhood's pre-tourist history. The fact that it shares a zip code with a Bubba Gump is, to use a precise term, a shame. The independent restaurants that gave the wharf its character have been progressively replaced, priced out, or converted into high-volume operations that prioritize table turns over food quality. Rents in the tourist-facing ground floor spaces along Jefferson Street and the piers are at levels that make a genuinely thoughtful, quality-focused restaurant difficult to operate profitably. The economics favor volume, and volume tends to produce the kind of food that keeps the numbers working, but doesn't give anyone a reason to come back. This process, the progressive replacement of authentic, locally specific establishments with chain and high-volume generic alternatives, has happened in tourist districts across the world. What's specific to Fisherman's Wharf is the scale of the contrast between what it was and what it became, and the fact that the city around it offers so many better options within a short distance. The safety and street conditions issue. San Francisco's broader public order challenges have had a specific and documented impact on Fisherman's Wharf and the surrounding tourist corridor. The city's homelessness crisis is one of the most acute in the United States. The unhoused population has been estimated at various points at between 7,500 and over 10,000 individuals. And while the crisis is concentrated in specific neighborhoods, the Tenderloin, certain stretches of Market Street, parts of Soma, it is visible in the tourist areas as well. The wharf's location on the waterfront, its accessible covered areas, and its status as a high pedestrian traffic zone make it a location where people sleeping rough, people in visible mental health crisis, and people engaged in open drug use are consistently present. Visitors who encounter these conditions when they are not from a major American city, and a significant portion of the wharf's international visitors are not, find the experience jarring in a way that affects how they describe San Francisco to other people. Property crime in the areas surrounding Fisherman's Wharf became so consistently reported that it generated national and international attention. Car break-ins around San Francisco's tourist areas, including the Embarcadero, the parking areas near the wharf, and tourist destinations across the city, were occurring at rates that prompted rental car companies at San Francisco International Airport to place explicit warnings in vehicles advising tourists not to leave any valuables visible in their cars. Several foreign governments' travel advisories for the United States specifically referenced San Francisco crime conditions. For a city that built much of its global brand on the idea of being a world-class, livable, progressive urban environment, these advisories were a particularly painful form of reputational damage. The city has made periodic enforcement pushes in the tourist areas, particularly in advance of major events like the Super Bowl 56 in 2022, or the APEC Summit in November 2023, when visible street conditions were significantly improved through concentrated enforcement efforts. But these improvements have not consistently persisted after the specific events ended, and the underlying conditions that produce them have not been resolved. This is not the primary reason the wharf has lost its appeal. The quality, value, and inauthenticity problems described elsewhere in this script are more fundamental. But in an era when tourists have access to social media, online reviews, and direct accounts from people who visited recently, the accumulated reports of unpleasant street-level experiences add a layer of deterrence on top of the existing reasons to choose a different destination within San Francisco. Pier 39 and the attraction problem. Pier 39, which opened in October 1978 as a commercial and entertainment complex built on a former cargo pier, became the centerpiece of Fisherman's Wharf's tourist infrastructure and, over time, something of a crystallization of everything that makes the area feel manufactured rather than organic. The pier itself is a genuinely well-managed facility. Clean, maintained, efficiently operated. The problem isn't the management. The problem is what the management is applied to. The shopping areas of Pier 39 are a standard mix of novelty retailers, chain restaurant outposts, and the kind of stores that exist specifically to be walked through while looking for something to do with the next 20 minutes. The Aquarium of the Bay, which opened on the pier in 1996, offers a transparent walk-through tunnel and is a perfectly serviceable aquarium for children. It's just that, in a city with the California Academy of Sciences in Golden Gate Park and within an hour's drive of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, perfectly serviceable is a challenging competitive position. The San Francisco Carousel, the street performers, and the assorted attractions on the lower level of the pier occupy the category of things that are fine if you're with children who are already tired and need 30 minutes of structured activity to get through before dinner. That is a real category of tourist need. It's not a reason to build your San Francisco itinerary around. The sea lions on the K-Dock remain the pier's most legitimate offering and one of the genuinely wonderful accidental consequences of the 1989 earthquake. The California sea lion colony, which in peak years has numbered over 1,000 animals during winter congregation periods, is a real wild population in a real location, doing exactly what they want to do. Apparently, regardless of the thousands of people photographing them from 15 feet away. They bark. They haul themselves over each other. They fight for dock space with absolutely no concern for anyone watching. They are the only thing at Pier 39 that was not designed to be there, and they are consequently the most popular thing there. But 45 minutes watching sea lions, which is approximately the right amount of time to appreciate them before the novelty settles into the background, does not build a full afternoon. The pier's other offerings aren't sufficient to fill the remaining hours with anything that most visitors afterward feel good about having chosen. The ferry to Alcatraz, which departs from Pier 33 adjacent to the wharf, is consistently the most purposeful departure point. The moment when people leave the manufactured experience and move towards something that actually justifies the trip to this part of the city. Alcatraz, the exception that proves the rule. It is worth noting, in fairness, that the most visited attraction in the entire Fisherman's Wharf area is not in the tourist district itself. It is Alcatraz Island, accessible by ferry from Pier 33, and it is genuinely excellent. Alcatraz is managed by the National Park Service and operated by Alcatraz Cruises under a concession agreement. The audio tour, narrated by former guards and inmates, is consistently cited as one of the best audio tours in the national park system. The island itself has layers of history beyond the famous federal penitentiary. The lighthouse, the oldest operating lighthouse on the West Coast, the Civil War-era fortifications, the 1969 to 1971 occupation by Native American activists of the Indians of All Tribes Coalition, a significant event in American Indian rights history. The ferry ride across San Francisco Bay is a legitimate experience, and the view of the city from the water is worth the trip. Alcatraz draws approximately 1.4 million visitors annually. Tickets sell out weeks or months in advance, particularly in summer, and must be booked through the National Park Service website. The price, approximately $40 to $45 per adult for the ferry and audio tour as of 2024, is well justified by what you get. The fact that the best thing accessible from Fisherman's Wharf is an island that requires advance booking, a ferry crossing, and a separate ticket that has nothing to do with any of the wharf's own establishments tells you something about the state of the destination itself. The pandemic effect and the recovery that didn't fully happen. The COVID-19 pandemic hit Fisherman's Wharf harder and more durably than many comparable tourist districts, for reasons that were partly structural and partly circumstantial. International tourism, which had been a significant component of the Wharf's visitor numbers, particularly visitors from Asia and Europe, who were drawn by San Francisco's global brand and by the tech industry's gravitational pull on international business travel, collapsed entirely during the pandemic and recovered more slowly than domestic leisure travel. The Wharf's high fixed costs meant that businesses were burning through reserves during the closure and reduced capacity periods without generating revenue sufficient to cover their obligations. Multiple restaurants and retailers that had operated at the Wharf for years closed permanently during 2020 and 2021. The vacancies that resulted were slow to fill, and in some cases remained visible as empty storefronts even years after restrictions were lifted. The post-pandemic recovery of San Francisco tourism overall was complicated by the city's broader public perception challenges. Downtown San Francisco's commercial office vacancy rate climbed to extraordinary levels following the shift to remote work, changing the character of the city's commercial core in ways that affected foot traffic, retail viability, and the general sense of civic vitality that makes a city attractive to visitors. The visibility of the homelessness and open drug use crisis in certain areas of the city generated consistent national media coverage that shaped potential visitors' perceptions. High-profile incidents of organized retail theft and street crime reinforced a narrative about public safety that made some travelers reconsider San Francisco as a destination. Fisherman's Wharf was not uniquely affected by these broader conditions. They affected the whole city's tourism economy, but the Wharf benefited less from the post-pandemic recovery than other parts of the visitor economy precisely because its pre-existing problems were already more severe. The travelers who returned to San Francisco after the pandemic were, on average, more discerning, more information-enabled, and more likely to have specific interests driving their itinerary. Interests that directed them toward the ferry building, the museums, the neighborhoods, the parks, and the restaurants that actually reflected contemporary San Francisco. What locals actually think. The most consistent thing you hear from San Francisco residents about Fisherman's Wharf is simple: they don't go there. Not because it's bad in any particular way they can articulate, but because the destination is transparently designed for people who are visiting San Francisco for the first time and don't know what it actually has to offer. For anyone who lives in the city, the Wharf offers nothing that isn't available better somewhere else, at comparable or lower prices, without the atmosphere of a tour bus staging area. This is a natural condition for any heavily tourist-oriented destination. The French Quarter in New Orleans, Times Square in New York, the Hollywood Walk of Fame in Los Angeles all share this property. Locals don't go. The difference at Fisherman's Wharf is that even tourists who have been to San Francisco before increasingly don't return to it. First-time visitors check it off the list and then, on subsequent trips, spend their time in the Ferry Building, the Mission, Dolores Park, Golden Gate Park, North Beach proper, the neighborhoods on the West Side, and the dozen other parts of the city that actually reflect what contemporary San Francisco is. The platform-based review aggregates tell a consistent story. The patterns and negative reviews of Fisherman's Wharf establishments cluster around a small number of recurring themes. Food that wasn't worth the price paid, a sense that the experience was designed for volume rather than quality, service calibrated for tourist throughput, and a general feeling of having been efficiently processed rather than genuinely hosted. The positive reviews are disproportionately from first-time visitors who arrived with modest expectations, or who were specifically charmed by the sea lions, which again is fair. The sea lions are doing their job without any direction from management. Local restaurant critic and food writer Soleil Ho, who covered San Francisco food for the San Francisco Chronicle, described the Wharf as a monument to what a tourist destination becomes when it stops trying to be connected to the place it's in. That is an accurate and specific diagnosis. The Wharf stopped trying to be connected to San Francisco sometime in the 1990s and has been coasting on the momentum of its reputation ever since, while the city around it continued to develop one of the most interesting food and culture scenes in the United States, a scene that now makes the Wharf's offering look not just mediocre, but actively disconnected from the city it claims to represent. Is there a future? The honest answer is that Fisherman's Wharf's future depends on decisions that its property owners and business operators have been deferring for years. Decisions about quality, about authenticity, about what the neighborhood is actually for, and which the economics of the current situation make increasingly urgent. The genuine assets are still there. The waterfront location is irreplaceable. The views, the bay access, the ferry terminal, the ability to look across to Alcatraz and the Marin headlands from a cafe table. The sourdough bread tradition, with Boudin's roots going back to 1849, is a genuine and extraordinary story that most visitors never hear in any depth. The sea lions are still on the dock and show no signs of reconsidering. The Aliotto family, the DiMaggio family, whose father Giuseppe was a fisherman there, the Castagnola family, is rich enough to sustain a neighborhood identity if anyone invested in telling it in a way that made visitors feel connected to it rather than adjacent to a gift shop selling it. There have been periodic efforts to reinvent specific parts of the area. Ghirardelli Square has changed hands multiple times and undergone various renovation cycles. The cannery has struggled to find a consistent identity for decades. Various new development proposals have appeared and stalled, constrained by the combination of California's Coastal Act, the Port of San Francisco's regulatory authority over the publicly owned waterfront piers, historic preservation considerations, neighborhood opposition, and the challenge of making construction financially viable at current San Francisco costs. What has not happened is the combination of genuine investment, curatorial vision, and commitment to quality that would be required to transform Fisherman's Wharf from a place people feel obligated to visit into a place people actively want to be. The gap between those two motivations is exactly the distance between what the neighborhood was and what it has become. As urban designer Rich Hillis, a former San Francisco Planning Commission member, described the waterfront's challenge, the location is extraordinary. The challenge is making the experience match the potential of the place. That challenge has been available for a long time. The question is whether anyone with the ability to address it decides it's worth trying. Fisherman's Wharf didn't collapse overnight. It declined gradually. The fishing industry leaving, the chain restaurants arriving, the gift shops multiplying, the quality dropping, the prices rising, the street conditions worsening, and the alternatives in the rest of the city improving simultaneously until the wharf's position as a default first stop became a nostalgic habit rather than an actual recommendation. The sea lions are still there. The sourdough is still good. The ferry to Alcatraz still runs. But the neighborhood as a whole is a destination that most people who know San Francisco have already said goodbye to, and that most first-time visitors leave saying they won't prioritize next time. That's why nobody wants to visit Fisherman's Wharf anymore. And whether that changes depends on whether anyone with the ability to change it decides to try. Hit that like button and subscribe if this one was worth your time. More content like this coming.